Hello and welcome to Geeky Guys. If you're into geeky things, we're the guys for you. Welcome to the video today. Whether you're here for the first time or you're returning, just a quick note before we get into the video for today. If you go on to the Patreon site in the next couple of days, next couple of weeks, there's a couple of exclusive videos that I'm putting up there for patrons. So if you would like to become a patron, now's the best time to do so. You're going to get more exclusive videos per week and per month and whatnot. So go and check that out. As always, all links are in the description. Today, we're getting into the start of our Strixhaven videos that we're doing here on the channel, and you know, what better way to sort of start looking at the set than looking at the Strixhaven legendaries. So we're going to go through the legendaries that they've put out. Now, yes, they've put out all the legendaries as of the recording, but again, I'm only going through the legends that are actually in Strixhaven itself, Strixhaven proper, not the commander deck ones. You know, if you want to see the face commanders that I already have done, we don't know the full deck lists of those decks, so there might be some random other legendaries in those decks. You can check out my video on the commander legends, the Strixhaven commanders in the video card that I'll put up in a bar there. But you know, we're going to get into it today because there's 22 legends in this set, and oh my god, we better get into it quickly because otherwise we'll be here all day talking about all these legendaries. But you know, there's some really sweet cards in this set, certainly. So you know, like when you're like looking at the set, the way I want to look at it is, you know, and I've sort of changed this up from what I've been doing before, is, you know, this is the first step, I think. If you're going to buy this set, what legendary do you want to build around? And, you know, I'm going to do this a bit differently from now on because there is always just so much to talk about. So, you know, this is the way that I want to put these together. Just to sort of filter things out and make things a little bit more easy, because otherwise videos go for, you know, hours and hours and hours, and it's just too much to sort of get through. Plus, it's just like more content out there for you guys to enjoy. So, but anyway, we'll get right into it now, starting with one of the big mythics from the set, Belladoros, Witherbloom. So 7 mana, 4/4. He's in the Golgari colors, so 5 and a black and a green. For a flyer that is an Elder Dragon, and there's a bunch of Elder Dragons in the set. There's one for each color pair of this set. At the beginning of each upkeep, create a 1/1 green and black pest creature token. So that's pretty good, just to create a 1/1 every single upkeep. That's your opponent's upkeeps as well. So basically, in a round table, when this gets back to your turn, you know, you've created 4 1/1s as well. So this kind of creates 8 power once you sort of get back to your turn. That whole, when the creature token dies, you gain 1 life. That's a kind of a cool ability, and it certainly has some synergies, especially with this commander. But the main ability with this card is pay 10 life, untap all lands you control, activate this ability only once each turn. So just double your mana pretty much. So the thing with this is you immediately play it, okay, in Commander. Now, you've probably lost some life by the time you've cast this, but that probably doesn't matter that much. So maybe you're at 30. Let's just say that that's, you know, a rough guesstimate of where you're at. Even if you're at, like, I don't know, 25, let's say somewhere in that range, by the time that you cast this, you're going to pay 10 life. If you're at 30, you're going down to 20. If you're at 25, you're going down to 15. So that is a large swing of your life, but I do think it is worth it, especially like if you can sort of do a lot more with this, because basically if you do have just 7 mana, basically you're just, like saying, well, you know what, now I'm just going to play another 7-drop for free, or I can basically say my commander was 0 mana for that essential part of what it does. And if you have more mana than that, like, if you had have used some of your mana rocks or whatever to cast it, yes, it doesn't untap those, but then again, you're still untapping all your lands, so you've still got mana to work with. I think it's going to be really good with things like Dharma of the East tree, things like that, because basically you can like play this 7-drop, play another 7-drop. Oh, look, I'm going to untap all my lands. Oh, look, I'm just going to play another 7-drop. Oh, and I'm going to play another 7-drop for free. So, you can just do a lot of really powerful things with that. Of course, you want to have lots of synergies to gain life in this sort of a deck, so that you can pay as much life as you want, as many times as you want. Of course, it goes semi-infinite with infinite life and whatnot, because you can always untap your mana, but it is restricted to being like only once per turn. But if you have a lot of instants, then it does help you out. Plus, again, like just maybe, like if you've tapped out, you pass the turn, someone goes to kill your stuff, you can be, well, in response, I'm actually going to pay 10 life, untap all my mana, and then I'm going to respond with something else, so that can be a good way to use it as well, because it is on each turn, so that is a very powerful effect. Now, it is 7 mana, so it is a little bit slow, but of course you're in green with this commander, so you can certainly ramp out into it. So, this is quite a cool commander. Maybe it just goes in the 99 of some dragon decks, but I'm looking at this of saying, what if I pulled this in a pack, or what if I wanted to look at building this as a commander? What direction should I try to go down? I think black does have a small amount of life gain synergies in the past. They've given it a few more synergies in Strixhaven itself, so, I think green has a little bit of life gain synergies and whatnot as well. So, there could be some space to play a deck that's sort of trying to gain life with this. And then, of course, you've just got this huge 4/4 in the air that, can beat people down. And, of course, just creating those random 1/1s every single upkeep is quite good. And that does gain you life when they die. So if you have a sacrifice style plan along with this as well, it could be quite good. So I think you need to have a few pieces to kind of make this work sometimes, but then again, of course, you could just have effects that sort of, give all creatures -1/-1, so those 1/1s will just die immediately or whatnot. So there are ways around that, but still, it's quite a cool thing. And the thing is, people aren't going to kill your 1/1s for you. That's the thing. People are going to try to kill your 4/4 dragon that's, doubling your mana and whatnot. But anyway, we'll move on to the next commander, which is quite an interesting, and this is part of another cycle of commanders that also have the backside of being a instant or sorcerer. I think some of them are instants, and some of them are sorceries, I think. Or maybe they're all sorceries, I'm not 100% sure. Too strongly at any of them, so we'll go on this journey together. Blueplex, Vexing Pest, 2 and a green pest creature. Other pests, bats, insects, and snakes, spiders you control get +1/+1. When a pest dies, when Perplexing Pest dies, you gain 4 life. So it's kind of a 3 or 4 tribal commander. So yeah, you've got bats, pests, insects, snakes, and spiders. So this could be a good multi tribe commander, or just a tribal commander that's sort of, doesn't really have, a lot of support or a lot of sort of main commanders that you can sort of go into. The sorcery on the back side of this, and this is really kind of cool for a lot of these commanders, where you can also have a sorcery in your command zone that you can keep paying for and playing throughout the game with that command attacks as well. So search for blacks, 2 and double black. You look at the top 5 cards of your library. You may put any number of them into your hand, the rest into your graveyard. You lose 3 life for each card put into your hand this way. So it's Moonlight Bargain, essentially, roughly speaking at least. But again, Moonlight Bargain essentially in your command zone, which you can basically cast every single turn as long as you have the mana to do so. Again, is quite a powerful card. So that's why I think a lot of the time that they haven't put sorceries onto commanders is because, or instants onto commanders, is because, again, you can just sort of cast and cast and cast that instant or sorcery over and over again and get so much value out of this. So you really want to be playing like a graveyard-based deck with this card, I think. And reanimating stuff and whatnot. So, that you can sort of not have to put too many cards to your hand and lose too much life. Sure, if you look at those cards and you go, yeah, I really, really want this one card or this 1 or 2 cards. Yeah, I'll play the 3 life for those 1 or 2 cards or whatever. But the rest there, they can go to my graveyard. And for the most part, that's what you're doing with this. I think you're just going to be like a little bit of self-mill. I think this wouldn't be your only piece, but you want to have a lot of recursion and graveyard synergies with this side. I don't know how well it sort of synergizes with blacks. It's quite interesting. It doesn't really sort of skew you in one direction or another direction for the most part with the back half of it. But, just giving your creatures +1/+1 if it's a bat, pest, insect, snake, or spider, and if it dies, you gain 4 life, and then you can maybe recur it, I don't know. If you've got infinite recursion somehow, then you can just gain infinite life, things like that. So that's interesting. So I'm not 100% sure where you sort of put this. I might put the search for blacks vexing pests into my graveyard deck, actually, because again, just getting that creature back to my hand's pretty easy, to be honest, in that deck. And then I can just flip it over, cast the sorcery, keep casting that sorcery, and just keep milling myself for value to find the cards that I actually need in my hand and put the cards that I don't need into my graveyard. So I think it's very good in the 99. I'm not 100% sure what you're going to do with it in the command zone, but it seems quite interesting, along with the other commanders that have spells on the other side. Speaking of which, we're moving on to another one that has a spell on the backside. Exertus, Auric, Overlord. So this is the Orzhov side. So one white, black, with a double strike 2/4. Has the Magecraft ability. So whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, you return target non-legendary creature card from your graveyard to your hand. And then you have the Rakdos spell on the back, 6 and Rakdos mana, so black and red. Sorcery, as an additional cost to cast a spell, you may sacrifice any number of creatures. This spell costs 2 less to cast for each creature sacrificed this way. Each opponent sacrifices a creature. Create a 3/6 black and red avatar creature token with haste, and whenever this creature attacks, it deals 3 damage to each opponent. So, this is a Mardu commander overall, and again, don't forget that part of the card is there because some people might try to slip this into their Orzhov deck or whatever. So don't forget that this is actually a Mardu card. So yeah, don't get caught quote unquote cheating. Same with the other cards. If they've got the other color on the other side of the card, they're both. So you have to play it in a deck that has these colors. You know, the front side, quite interesting. I don't think it's the best because, of course, you want to return things from your graveyard to the battlefield. But, you know, just returning your creatures to your hand, that's still pretty good to be able to cast later. You know, double strike, I don't know how relevant that's going to be, but, you know, helps out to block or whatnot, or attack sometimes. You know, but overall, I think the front side of this is like the side that you want the least. I think you might want the back side of this the most. Sometimes you're going to want the front side, but I think maybe you just want this for the back side. Just, you know, you run this random sacrifice deck, and there's a lot of sort of Mardu sort of sacrifice decks that sort of don't really have a commander, so this kind of gives you a commander to work with. Sacrifice a bunch of your stuff, you know, get yourself this avatar thing that, you know, punches people and deals a bunch of damage to them and, you know, makes people sacrifice a creature. You know, if you get this off for 2 mana every time and again, the more creatures you sort of have on the battlefield that you can sack and just get value out of it, and you can sort of just keep your opponent's boards somewhat clear and, you know, get in there with this, you know, token, you know, even if it's just the attack trigger of dealing 3 damage to each opponent. You know, it's got pretty big toughness. Don't think it's going to die too easily in combat, despite it not having much evasion. You know, that doesn't really matter. You know, it has hastes as well, so that means it can get in right away. Haste is really important to a card like this. So I'm not 100% sure, again, if you'd put it in a 99, because again, you'd have to be in these 3 colors plus a number of other colors or whatever. So do you really have a 4 color or 5 color deck this would work in, or is it just like 5 color good stuff? I don't know. I don't think it really fits into that. You really want to have some sort of synergy. Then again, I'm just thinking, you know, the backside sort of sacrifices a whole bunch of stuff for you. Then you sort of play the front side and you just sort of cast a few instant sorceries and whatnot and just sort of get a few of those creatures that you've sacked back to your hand. So that could be good. But then you can sort of start that whole process again of sacking things and then sort of, you know, returning them and whatnot. So there could be more application for this going down, but, you know, certainly a very interesting and cool card, and I think it's one of the few 3-color cards in the set. But we'll move on now to another of our Elder Dragons. This is in fact the Izzet one. 2 and Izzet colors, so blue and a red. 3/4 flyer. When Gazara Prismani enters the battlefield, we create a treasure token, so it's kind of 3 mana. Artifacts you control have tap to add 1 mana of any color, spend this mana only to cast an instant or sorcery. So you've got a whole bunch of treasures in this deck, probably, for the most part, because again, you're in Izzet and you've probably got a few things that make treasures and whatnot in these colors. So, you know, just having that quote-unquote Urza ability, or one of Urza's abilities, except that it's 1 mana of any color and not just blue, to tap any of your artifacts. And again, you can just like play artifact.deck with this. There's a lot of Izzet artifact decks. And then you're also just playing instant and sorcery. So you're not playing like Izzet, like Brutaclad, like what Brutaclad would be, where you're trying to make these tokens and you're trying to, you know, make bigger and better tokens and whatnot with all of your tokens and whatnot. You're trying to amass mana and you're trying to cast a lot of instant and sorceries off those off those artifacts and whatnot that you've made. And again, it doesn't matter whether those artifacts are tokens or not. You're just looking for cheap, good artifacts that do something when they come in, and you know and you can get additional value out of tapping them, and then you can maybe sacrifice them or whatnot, or you can use them in another way or whatnot. And it does get around the whole. Oh no, it actually doesn't get around the whole haste ability actually either. So I was just about to say it gets around the haste ability or whatever on creatures, because I thought it said tap. Yeah, it doesn't. So you do have to mostly have non-creatures in this deck for the most part. But a few creatures in this deck would be fine. I'm sure everyone wants to, sort of put the classics of in there so that you can get a lot of treasures. But then again, you've got to rely on your opponents to have some of those effects and whatnot. But this is kind of cool. I can see not a huge amount of space that it's already exactly occupied by this, but it sort of crosses over between a few different things. Again, it might go in the 99 of a Dragons deck, but I would want to run this in a deck where you've actually got something to do with it, because in those Dragon decks you're usually just 5 colors, and you're only going to probably make that one treasure or a very few treasures in that sort of a deck, because again you've got access to green, so what's the point of having artifacts or whatnot except maybe Soul Ring, and then it's like, well, why am I tapping my Soul Ring for 1 mana when I can tap 2? So I don't know. Bit weird. So yeah, I'm not sure what to do with this, but it seems very cool and very interesting. Next up is Hoffrey Ghost Forge. So 3 and Boros, so white and a red. So 4/5. Spirits you control get +1/+1, have haste and trample. That's kind of a weird ability for a Boros card. But what's even weirder is its next ability. Whenever another non-token creature you control dies, exile it. If you do, create a token that's a copy of that creature, except it's a spirit in addition to its other types. And it has, when this creature leaves the battlefield, return the exiled card to your graveyard. So it's very, very, very weird what this Boros card's doing. It's not bad at all. It's very good what this Boros card's doing. I think that this is a great Boros card, and it has a lot of cool things that you can do with it. You could play a bunch of random spirits in this deck that are in your colors, and there are some spirits that are in these colors that don't see much play. So that could be interesting to a degree, but then you could also just sort of play this deck where you're like, okay, either I'm sacrificing my things for value to get them back, or to get them bigger and better and fast and hasty and whatnot. So that's a way you could sort of build this. You also kind of want to give your tokens or whatnot vigilance. You want to give them flying. You want to give them other abilities so that they can get in for damage easier. Or you're just like, I'm going to play all my red-white stuff that has some ETB or LTD sort of benefit, so enter the battlefield or leave the battlefield benefit, so that then when my creature dies or when it enters or whatever, I get something off of it, and then I'll also get these extra spirits, especially if it makes spirits or whatnot or has something to do with spirits, then that's really good as well. So it's really interesting, and it actually gives Boros and we're going to see this a few times in this set, where they're actually giving Boros some sort of a card advantage sort of style effect to do with the graveyard, and that's really cool. I really like what they've been doing with this set for Boros, and I think it's really cool that they've actually started to give the color pair something, more than just like equipment.deck, you know, like, so it'll be cool to see some more stuff. I don't know, this is a dwarf, so again, maybe it goes in dwarf decks, I'm not sure. But again, it might just help protect you from a board wipe or whatnot. And again, once you sort of get back to your turn, you've got some trampling, bigger spirits, and if those spirits leave the battlefield or die or whatnot, you get your cards back to your graveyard so you can recur them later or whatnot, do more with them. You know, so there's interesting ways you can build around this. Alright, next up. Oh boy. This one, I don't know what to make of this one. Jidarzi, Oracle of Archivus. That's a mouthful to say. I'm not sure if I pronounced it right. But a 8 mana spell on the front side and a 4 mana spell on the back side, which is Journey to the Oracle. So the front side, the blue side, the creature side, discard a card. You can return this card to its owner's hand. So when it's on the battlefield, you can protect it if somebody's going to kill it or exile it or whatever. Or, you know, late game, whatever, you just kind of like, oh, this command is already 8 mana. I don't want to try to have to cast it again. You know, I'll put it back to, you know, for even more. I'll just put it back to my hand, you know. Magecraft, whenever you cast or copy an instant or sorcery, you can reveal the top card of your library. If it's a non-land card, you may cast it by paying 1 rather than paying its mana cost. If it's land, you put it into the battlefield. So this can easily be very powerful because the ability doesn't say whenever you cast it or copy it from hand, or whenever you cast that spell from hand. So if you hit instant and sorceries off the top of your library with this, you can just keep casting and casting and casting instant and sorceries one by one for 1 mana each, rather than paying their mana cost. So if you have a really big spell on top, you can just pay 1 and cast it. If you have a cheap cantrip, I guess it's not that good on top, but I think you would play a lot of cheap cantrips in this deck to, you know, set off this ability to be like, okay, I'm going to look at the top card, reveal the top card. Okay, it's a land, it goes to the battlefield. Okay, whatever, that doesn't matter. Then my instant or sorcery resolves, you know, whatever it does. I might draw 2 cards off of that. Whatever. At least that's giving you a form of card advantage. If it's a spell, then you're like, okay, I'll pay 1 and I'll cast it. Oh, look, it's another instant sorcery. So I'll reveal the top. Oh, look, it's another instant sorcery. So you can storm off in a way with this if you have the right setup on the top of your deck. It's going to be kind of hard to do that, but there are ways to do it. Journey to the Oracle. So this is quite weird because it looks like a ramp spell. You may put any number of land cards from your hand onto the battlefield. Then, if you control 8 or more lands, you may discard a card. If you do, return Journey to the Oracle to its owner's hand. So, you know, you can just kind of storm off with this as well, kind of, if you have enough cards in your hand and you have enough mana. If you have infinite mana, of course, you can keep playing this and playing this and playing this, and then, you know, keep returning it to your hand as long as you've got enough cards to sort of discard to it. But if you're drawing a lot of cards while you're, or if you have your entire deck in your hand, or almost your entire deck in your hand, or the ability to sort of, you know, copy your commander as well. Like if you have your commander on the battlefield, then you copy it with a clone, you know, effect. Or if your real commander dies, or you can even just sacrifice it because you don't care if, you know, you've got a copy of your commander on the battlefield. I know that's a bit of a hoop to jump through, but it is a way you can sort of synergize with the other half of this spell. So this is a 4 mana spell that you can cast fairly cheaply, pay that 1, you know, and get another spell off the top, get more lands, cast more of this, discard more cards, so on and so forth. So it sort of works with itself to a degree if you can copy your commander. But I think this is a really powerful effect, and of course it's the mythics are very powerful for the most part. But, you know, again, just the way that this is put together, I can see a lot of people are going to want to try to build around this in Commander. You know, it's a really cool thing, and I think all the sorcery spell side commanders as well are kind of interesting, especially the ones that you can this one that you can sort of get it back to your hand, cast it for cheaper and whatnot. So that kind of is very interesting as well. So I'm not sure exactly what you're going to do with this, but it's sort of a, you know, spell slinger deck for the most part, where you want to, you know, get a lot of spells in your deck, so that, you know, and even just cheap spells and big spells, a mixture of both, so that you can just cast something huge for like 1 mana, because of course casting something huge for like 1 mana is going to be really good. You don't want something like Cyclonic Rift too much though in this deck. That's one thing, because you can't overload it. So you don't want any of those kicker or overload cards that much in this deck, because you're just not going to be able to get that ability, I don't think. So just remember that when you're thinking about building this deck. Alright, next up is another white card, another white mythic. This one, Mavinda, Student's Advocate. So 3 mana, bird, advisor, with flying, 2/3. 0 mana. You may cast target instant or sorcery card in your graveyard this turn. If that spell doesn't target a creature you control, it costs 8 more mana to cast this way. If that spell would be put into your graveyard, exile instead of putting it into any other zone. Activate this only once each turn. So what I'm envisioning is this is another feather style deck. This can certainly go in the feather deck as well. I don't know how much you really want it, but again, just like getting that extra value out of your instant sorceries that do go to the graveyard sometimes, whatnot, is good. But again, I think this can be its own deck, and some people might really want to build around this. This is again another, like, this is wow, white actually gets something interesting to do. It's a really difficult build around to do, but you know, again, people worked out how feather can work and whatnot. But you might really want this in feather, because you might more or less want to put those cards back to your hand, because that's a replacement effect. If you target something, you know, you can put it back to your hand rather than having to exile it, I believe, unless, I don't know if that 100% works, but I believe that is how it works. Someone had tell me that I'm wrong, and somebody probably will. But anyway, you know, like, in a mono white deck, I'm not sure. Again, there are things that you can do with it. It's very interesting. And again, that's the best thing about it. It's something that there's actually, like, wow, this is cool. This is actually something people would actually want to build around, rather than just like, yeah, this is another mono white commander that doesn't really do anything. It's just there and it exists. Or it's just another one that's just like equipment.deck. Have fun, you know, like, yeah. So we want to play interesting and different things, and this is a great, interesting and different thing that we can play with. Alright, another Boros card here, and this one's actually got a Planeswalker on the backside of this flip card. So, Milara, Crafty Companion, 2/3 for 3, it's a wolf. Whenever an opponent attacks one or more Planeswalkers you control, put a loyalty counter on each Planeswalker you control. Whenever a permanent you control becomes the target of a spell or an ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. So that little bit of card draw, pretty good. Some of these cards, to a degree, I think they're somewhat costed for standard purposes and whatnot. So the wolf, it's not that impressive or not that powerful really, unless you're sort of playing in a Boros Planeswalker deck. So that could be interesting again, but it's a really big build around, and I've seen some mono white Planeswalker decks and whatnot, but again, it's not a budget deck for the most part. Even though you probably just run all the Boros ones because again, you're in that zone that you might be like, well, you know what, I need everything that I can get. But then again, you might just play this in another style of deck. You might play this in a Mardu deck or whatever, just to be like, hey, you know what, I want to play Queen Chaser that is Planeswalkers or whatever. This might go into a deck like that. The backside, Luca Wayward Bonder, 4 and double red, 5 loyalty Planeswalker. So, +1 ability. You may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. If a creature card was discarded this way, draw 2 cards instead. -2. Return target creature card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It gains haste. Exile it at the beginning of the next upkeep, sorry. -7. You get an emblem with whenever a creature enters the battlefield under your control, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. So, quite interesting. It sort of has a looting effect for its +1, but if you loot away a creature, you draw an additional card, which is good. That is a good plus. I think, 2 turns to tick it up so that it will ult, that's not unreasonable at all. And, if you're just getting a little bit of value out of this, like that you need, I don't know if you're actually playing some sort of Boros reanimated deck again, because there's some stuff that we're seeing from this set and whatnot that actually sort of pulls you in that direction. So maybe, but you might be in a Mardu deck, or you might be in another 4-color deck or a 5-color deck even, where some of these abilities are relevant. The -2, actually, it's really good, I think, in this sort of thing, because again, even if you don't have that tick up for the first turn, okay, sure, that doesn't matter. You just tick down to get one of your better creatures back from the graveyard to the battlefield. Yeah, sure, you've got to get rid of it at the next upkeep, but you can attack with it, or you can block with it, or you can do something else with it. So it also doesn't say if it would die or anything else. Exile it instead. So you could get around that ability a little bit, unless they're perhaps going to errata that, which might be a little bit of a oversight or whatever on that card ability. So just remember that might get errated. For now, we're just going to do it as it is. The -7, basically like Terror of the Peaks ability that never goes away. So that can be pretty good at closing out the game. It is to a target. So, that can be, sort of a little bit hit or miss sometimes. But still, I still think that this is very good and very powerful and quite interesting to build around, or even just to throw in decks that sort of would care about both of these sorts of sides of both of these abilities, or at least one of the sides of one of the abilities. And again, these both sort of work well together as well. So, again, if you've got ways to copy or clone the creature side, again, you probably don't care that much if it dies to legendary rule, because then you can sort of get the other side so that you can do other stuff with it or whatnot. So, of course, in standard it's a bit easier, or modern or whatnot, those sorts of formats, because you can have 3 or 4 of this card in your deck, but in Commander you can only have the 1, so you've got to find ways to copy it. But anyway, at least it's a Boros card that does something interesting and is in an interesting direction. We'll move on to the next one. Squirrel, Silver Quill, Another Elder Dragon, 3 and Orzhov Colors, so 2/5 with double strike and flying. At the beginning of combat on your turn, you may choose 2 of these abilities. Each mode must target a different player. So, target player gets a 2/1 black and white Inkling creature token with flying. Target player draws a card and loses 1 life. Target player puts a +1/+1 counter on each creature they control. So, you can get one of these abilities for yourself, but then you've got to target at least one of your opponents for the other ability, so it offers a little bit of semi-group hug, or sort of semi-downside at least, but you can sort of get around this ability to a degree as well, because you can sort of go, okay, well, you know what, the player who has basically no cards in hand, I will make them draw 1 card and lose a life. They have no cards in hand anyway, unless they draw a removal spell. It's probably not that relevant to me right now, so, but maybe you would only target yourself for that, just in case. But again, if you're not attacking the player directly, well, you can choose the player that you're not attacking to give them a 2/1 creature, and then be like, okay, I gave you that 2/1. You're not going to attack me with it next turn, are you? Or if somebody doesn't have any creatures on the board, you can just say, hey, look, I'm going to give all your creatures a +1 counter. Oh, you don't have any creatures? Oh, well, you don't get any counters. So sorry. So you can get around it a little bit if you're attacking the player and they only have like ground blockers, then maybe the +1/+1 counter is not that relevant. But again, you might not want to give that to them, because then they might just be like, well, thanks for making my creatures bigger. So it is difficult to choose exactly what you're going to do to whom, but I like that build around aspect of this card, because at least it's like giving you that point to be like, well, maybe I'll just run something that says, opponent's creatures, or all creatures get -1/-1, or whatever. So that if you give them that inkling, that they don't get it, or whatever. Or if you have Solemnity or something like that in your deck, you just be like, oh, cool, I have Solemnity, I'll give all your creatures +1/+1. Oh, what's that? I have Solemnity? Oh, no, yeah, I don't. So there's ways that you can sort of get around that. And there are things like that you could sort of do with that player draws a card, loses a life sort of thing, especially if they're on 1 life or whatever, or if they've 1 card in their deck or whatever. Things like that, so those are interesting ways to build around this card. So I'm glad that these cards are build arounds for the most part. I don't want just like throw this in every deck type cards for the most part. Next is the Civic Elder Dragon, flying and trample 4/4, and it's a 3 and Civic. So, pretty good for the most part. A little bit here and there under custom, but then again, still pretty good. When it enters the battlefield, Taser Quandrix, when Taser Quandrix enters the battlefield, does double the number of +1/+1 counters on target creature you control. When it attacks, you may have base power, and this creature's base power and toughness, what? No, wait. When it attacks, you may have base power and toughness of other creatures you control equal to his power and toughness until end of turn. I thought you chose 1 creature. Sorry, I misread that completely. So it's all other creatures that you control become, 4/4s essentially, basically. So that's an interesting ability, especially now I've reread it and know what it actually does. So I don't know. Do you run this just as Simic +1/+1 counters deck? I don't know. Does it go just in a, Dragon's deck? I don't know. Like, again, all these Elder Dragons, of course, they can go into a Dragon deck because they're Dragon. But whether you want to do that, I'm not sure, because they don't do anything that's straight up, just like a free roll thing. They're things that are a build around, so I'm not sure. Like, if you have some amount of synergies, like, maybe you just don't care because you're just like, dragons go BR, BR, BR. I kill you. I don't care what else they do. They fly, and they're big, and they're stompy. That's it. That's all I care about. But, I don't know whether you can put counters onto this, because if you have Great Henge, let's say, on the battlefield, right, you resolve Great Henge, put a +1/+1 counter onto your commander here, right? Then you resolve your commander's enter the battlefield effect to double the number of counters on target creature you control, which is your commander. So instead of getting 1 counter, you get 2. So then you get a 6/6. I mean, the later on the game goes, the better that gets, because again, with Great Henge and things like that, you are drawing cards and whatnot as well. So that can ease the pain of having to cast this for more mana later in the game and whatnot, especially when it doubles its power and whatnot. So if you can get more counters onto this, maybe it's a Voltron deck, I don't know, but then again, like, I don't know, if you can Voltron it, then it's kind of cool, because then you can make all of your creatures bigger as well, so that's kind of a cool way to go about it. Also, it's kind of an anthem to anything that's small, so that's good as well. So you might want to play a lot of things that make either tokens or whatnot in this deck as well, just to sort of, or just smaller things that sort of can be evasive and whatnot to a degree, but they don't hit too hard, so that you can buff them up and you can just like get in there with your stuff. I don't know, this seems like an interesting build around again. All these seem very cool to build around. So I like that aspect of these. Alright, next, I think this is our last Elder Dragon. This is the Boros one. So 5 in Boros, Vermilius Lawhold, 5/5, Flying, Vigilance, and Haste. So those are some good stats, like Flying, Vigilance, and Haste. You're just going to play this hasty Vigilance, attack someone for 5, stay on defense. That's a really good ability. But those abilities are really good just to start with. But when it attacks, you look at the top 7 cards of your library. You may cast an instant or sorcery spell with CMC or mana value less than or equal to this creature's power from among them. Without playing their mana cost, put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So you can cast a CMC or mana value 5 or less spell from among those cards for free. This is Boros Spellslinger, I guess. I don't know. Do you want to just run a whole bunch of the Dragon Fodder style cards where you're just like, well, I'm going to play these dragons that I can sacrifice, these goblins that I can sacrifice to my dragons because that's part of the flavor? Or do you want to just play Boros spells, I guess? I don't know. Do you want to play things like Young Pyromancer that just makes tokens off of, you casting instant or sorcery, so then you have these random tokens to use for a block fodder or attack fodder maybe sometimes, or sacrifice fodder or whatever it is. Very interesting. Again, just like all these build rounds, I really like these build rounds. I don't really like to see just this is good stuff, go, I like to see these cards that are okay, so what am I going to do with this? How am I going to make this card work? Or is it just if I don't hit something, whatever, I don't care. It's a 5/5 dragon, that hits people and can stay on defense, so dragons go BRBR. I don't know. But to me, I want to build around all of these abilities if I'm building this deck. Next, is one of the most talked about commanders from the set. This is the 5-color commander from this set. It is an artifact, which it is colorless. So that's kind of interesting. It's a little bit like Golgari in that way, where it's a colorless commander, but it also has 5 colors in its text box, so it is a 5-color commander. But this commander says you can't cast permanent spells. That's a really big drawback. That's a really, really big drawback. We've just been talking about all these Elder Dragons and all these creatures and all these Planeswalkers. Yes, sure, a lot of them have that, or a couple of them have that spell other side. But then you've just got, so many permanents for the most part. But it does say cast, so you can still play lands with this thing out. It is 3 mana, so it is a very cheap commander. But it is also just a 1/4, so it's not that threatening in that regard in terms of power and toughness. So, main ability, pay 4 mana of any color. You add Woburg colors to your mana pool. When you cast your next instant this turn, exile cards from the top of your library until you exile an instant or sorcery spell with lesser CMC or mana value. Until end of turn, you may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Each other card exiled this way is put on the bottom of your library in a random order. So it's really a spell slinger deck, a big mana sort of spell slinger deck. And you, I think, kind of want a lot of these effects that kind of untap your commander as well. But you also want to find ways that you can untap not only your commander, but at least, 4 other permanents. So that's going to be really tough. Or 3 other permanents at least, probably, because you've still got that maybe 1 mana floating around, maybe, I'm not sure, but it just does depend. But again, if you, spend 2 of the mana, then you have 3 mana. So then you could cascade for something that's 2 or less. I don't know. You really want to be, 3 or 4 mana, I think, or maybe 5 mana. But again, I think you really want 1 or 2 of that mana left lying up so that you can, perhaps find ways to reuse this ability. You might want abilities that are on lands, especially because those lands that say you can untap a permanent or you can tap this permanent for extra mana or whatnot, things like that, those can be really good. But you can always play or cast permanent spells before you cast this thing, but since it's such a low CMC, I don't just see you running that many of them. I just don't see that it's worth it. So you really want to have things that in this deck that create tokens, at least for blockers and whatnot, or whatever, so that you protect yourself for a little while. Or you want to run literally all the rats that you can to stop people from attacking you. Because again, you can't play anything like Ghostly Prison or whatnot, things like that, for the most part in this deck. I mean, you could play Teferi's Protection and cards like that, or just Fogs or whatnot in general. That could be a really cool way to do this. And it is an instant speed ability as well, so you can use some of this other mana to be like, okay, I cast my, my Teferi's Protection or my Fog or whatever it was, but also I'm going to cascade essentially through my deck for another instant sorcery, which will give me some additional value and whatnot, so that I can get, other things on my board, whatnot, and do whatever else I'm doing. So it's a really cool build around commander. It's not like Golgari in that way that it's just like, I'll play good stuff and, I'll just play them for free off the top or whatnot. It is giving you that ability to get something of value from its ability, but you do have to really build around it. So it's really quite cool in its abilities. I think we're going to keep talking about all these cards that have this like ability that I'm talking about to be like, it's a build around. Don't just be like, oh, I'll jam it in any deck for the most part and it'll be cool and it'll be fine. There are a few cards that are here that certainly fit into that space, but for the most part, again, they're build-arounds, which is really cool. Next up on our list is another Civic commander, so of course it's going to be really strong. Front side is the green side, Kidini, Dean of Substance. Taps to exile the top card of your library. If it's a land card, put it into your hand. Otherwise, put a study counter on it. So for 5 mana, 4 and a green, you create a 0/0 green and blue fractal creature token. You put +1/+1 counter on that creature for each different mana cost or mana value among non-land cards you own in exile with study counters on them. Quite interesting, but the one thing is you really want this front side with haste, and I think the back side too. So you have to be playing Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots, all the things that give you haste in this sort of a deck so that you can, and again, you also just want to protect it. So you need those effects so that you know it just doesn't die to removal right away, so that you get something out of it. Like if you get that land, you know, it just goes to your battle. Oh, it goes to your hand. So that's kind of good. If you have a major land drop for turn, you can play it for turn or whatnot. And if it's a non-land, you're putting it in exile and you're putting study counters on it, and then you get creatures for 5 mana equal to the number of different mana costs or mana values that you have. The other side, the blue side, Imaram, Dean of Theory, flying 3/3. You pay 2 blue and X and tap it. Exile the top X cards of your library. Put a study counter on each of them. Then you may put a card you own with a study counter on it into your hand. So this side again, both of these sides work well with each other to agree. So if you can clone one side, you know, you get to use both abilities essentially very well. You're getting a lot more card advantage with this, or sort of looks at cards, I guess, is sort of the way to look at it. So you can get a lot more cards. It's kind of like Blue Sun Zenith to a degree, a little bit with that ability, because you keep doing it again and again, because Blue Sun Zenith keep shuffling into your library. But at least this is on your commander. You can keep doing it every turn. Once again, you want the Swift Boots, you want the Lightning Greaves, you want all those things, sort of things to give your commander haste and protection. And you want some open mana when you cast it, so that you can actually do its ability as quickly as possible, so that you can start getting things into your study counter area or your exile area. And you know, there's 2 ways to play this. You can either play the green side first, because the green side is cheaper. You know, start exiling a few things, you know, maybe getting a few lands here and there, and eventually it might die or whatever to a wrath or whatever. Or someone finally, you know, gets rid of your Lightning Greaves or Swiftfoot Boots or whatever. Things like that, or gets rid of your Hexproof or Shroud or whatever. Then you can cast the other side, and then you've got a lot of things in your study area that you can sort of get back with it once you start paying for its ability, and they go back to your hand, then you can cast them and whatnot. So it's a way of getting that repeated card advantage. Or you can just sort of cast the backside, exile a lot of your deck, still getting a few things into your hand with it here and there, and then, you know, get the flip side of it when it dies, and just start pumping out these these huge creatures with its 5 mana ability and whatnot. And again, that 5 mana ability isn't a tap ability. So if you tap that side of it, you can still activate that other ability to create those creatures. So, you know, if you have that 5 mana when you're playing it, you know, you're like, well, I just exiled another mana value or another mana cost, whatever. But I'm going to pass my turn because this thing doesn't have haste or whatever. So I'm just going to pass. I don't have anything else to do unless you, because I've already attacked, or I've already done this, or I've already done that, whatever. So that then people can be like, okay, you've just got a 2/2, I'll attack you. Oh, cool. In response, before blockers are declared, I'm going to make a 12/12 or whatever it is, like for 5 mana. And then I'm going to block your creature with my thing. So that is very powerful. So don't forget that ability is there as well. So, and you can also just do that at instant speed. Again, you can exile the top card to get another card. And then create the blocker as well. So, don't forget that's there. You can do it at any time. But yeah, another cool build around. I'm not sure study counters and whatnot are that big, but, just like, making tokens and whatnot, and also somewhat +1/+1 counters to a degree, seems like it has quite a bit of support around some of its aspects. So, you can certainly put a lot of good stuff into a deck like this. Again, I think it works well with clones, so especially the ones that say ignore the legendary rule, but then again you might want to sack it to get the other side, so you might not care about that. But anyway, we'll move on to the next card, and another Boros card, and I'm liking to see more and more Boros cards, especially the ones that give us card advantage in those colours, and that give you something different to sort of build around, rather than just like the general stuff again that we've been used to for so long. So front side, Plague, Dean of Chaos, a 1 and a red for a 2/2. Taps to discard the card to draw a card. So again, you want your Swift Boots, Lightning Greaves, etc. in this deck to protect him and to get his ability off as quickly as possible. 5 mana, 4 and a red. Reveal the top. Reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-legendary, non-land card with CMC or mana value 3 or less. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Put all revealed cards that weren't casted into the bottom of your library in a random order. So, yeah, getting both of these abilities is really good. Of course, you've got to wait to get to the 5 mana ability and eventually hopefully get there as well. But still, just like looting once per turn, you maybe want this in some sort of weird Boros style madness deck so that you can discard cards and cast them for cheaper for their madness or whatever. That seems interesting. Revealing cards until you reveal a non-legendary, non-land card. CMC essentially, or mana value 3 or less. Just kind of like Sun Titan ability, except it's, from your library. Interesting, but it is non-land, of course. So, you want to fill your deck with a lot of non-legendary, non-land cards that are CMC or mana value 3 or less. Of course, I'm going to keep saying CMC and mana value in the same sentence every time, I think, or almost every time, because that's what I'm used to. I'm just used to CMC. I know what it means. Most people know what it means. We're just not going to change from that. Anyway, the other side, 2 and a white, 1/3. Undo Star, Dean of Order. I'm terrible at pronouncing some of these names, sorry. Other tapped creatures you control get +1/+0. Other untapped creatures you control get 0/+1. Whenever you attack, untap each creature you control, then tap any number of creatures you control. So that ability to untap and untap creatures is a bit weird. Essentially, at first I was like, this just gives your team vigilance. Why doesn't it just say your team has vigilance? Like, that doesn't make much sense to me. But when you do attack, you can untap any number of creatures you control. So, if you have tapped some creatures for other abilities, like Plague, of course you can't have Plague on the battlefield at the same time as you have this, for the most part, unless you've got clones again, but I don't think there's many clones in these colours, unless, again, you're in more colours. But again, you've just got a lot of these effects that are in red and white that you can tap for different abilities. So those abilities, or those creatures with those abilities, you can untap, and you can make them your blockers for next turn. So that's kind of an interesting thing that you can do, and that gives them that +0/+1, which is really good for defensive purposes. And when you're attacking, also your creatures are getting +1/+0. So when you're attacking and you can untap all your attacking creatures as well, they're getting +1/+1 essentially. So that's really good as well. So it does give your creatures vigilance, but it also means you can untap your creatures that have a tap ability. So if you even only attack with one creature and you perhaps have 6 creatures that you've tapped for abilities, you can untap them all. And again, you can reuse those tap abilities, before the end step of the last player before your turn or whatever, or before you're attacked or in blocks or whatever, if your creature's going to die or whatnot. Get extra value out of them. So that's really cool. I actually think that the backside of this is kind of the coolest part, or the part that will make the deck work like the way I want to work around it. I want to build around this tap and untap sort of ability where you can have all these creatures that have those sorts of abilities. You might want creatures like Zerta the Dawnwaker from Ikoria, that says abilities cost 2 less, because anything that says pay 2 or pay 3, whatever, tap it and do this, you want to reduce that cost as much as you can so that you can pay 1 or 0 basically. I think it says you can't reduce it to less than 1, whatever. But at least that mana that you have to invest into all these tap abilities, of course you want the ones that are for 0 as well, or for free. But of course, if you want to include some of the really cool and good ones, I still think you want those abilities that will reduce the cost to activate them as well. So, I don't see any real homes that this can go into. I really think that this is its own archetype, where you've got a lot of these tap and untap abilities on one side of your deck, but you also want a lot of them to be 3 or less, so that you can reveal them from the top with Dean's Plug's ability, off the top. So that's pretty cool. I think all this, you want to find ways to synergize with both sides as much as possible. Of course, you're still going to have some other cards in here that don't fit with the plan, because they're just too good not to run. But still, I think, this is a really cool build around. Next up, we've got ourselves an Orzhov commander, or an Orzhov legendary. So, front side, Silval, Dean of Radiance. So, 1 and a white, 1/1 flying and vigilance. You can tap to put a +1/+1 counter on each creature that enters the battlefield under your control this turn. So, it kind of has the ability that I can't remember what the land is that actually does this for green creatures. I can't quite remember. But it has that ability, but it is all creatures. It doesn't have to be green, or it doesn't have to be white, or it doesn't have to be purple, or whatever. So that's quite interesting. Again, having that ability of flying and vigilance is kind of a little bit weird to a degree. It is 1/1, so I don't think you're getting in your commander beats with this thing, especially since it's a tap. Then again, maybe you just want the Lightning Greaves, Swiftfoot Boots sort of style thing that I was talking about with the other couple commanders that have these tap abilities. So maybe that you can get this thing to a 2/2. I don't know. Eventually it might get there in the air. I don't think so. But again, it's just an interesting ability to give all your stuff +1/+1 counters, which works well with the other side of this commander, Embrose, Dean of Shadow. So 2 and double black, 4/4. E taps to put a +1/+1 counter on another target creature you control. Target creature. Then he deals 2 damage to that creature. Then, whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, draw a card. So it has that ability that one of the other commanders from the last year's commander decks had, where it said, it was one of the partner commanders actually, that said whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, draw a card. So that ability just to have if you have a few of your creatures with +1/+1 counters on them die, pretty good. You get a few cards out of them, you refill your hand, you can get back in the game after a board wipe or whatnot. The weird ability to put a +1/+1 counter on a creature and then deal 2 damage to it, it's really weird. I can't really see you doing this to that many of your opponent's creatures that much, because how many creatures are 1 or 2 power, even if you put the +1/+1 counter on it? It's like, what does that do? So I'm really on the idea of that you need to be putting these +1/+1 counters on your own creatures, and then there's this slight downside of it, dealing 2 damage to a creature. So you really don't want anything that has 2 or less toughness once you've put the +1/+1 counter on, because the +1/+1 counter goes on first. So if something does have 2 toughness, it automatically goes up to 3. So then it gets dealt 2 damage, so it has 1 toughness again, I guess, but it has a counter on it now, which is permanent. So if it survives, which it theoretically should, then you can, do more stuff with it. It's much more limited than what the front side of this card is. So I don't know. It's sort of a bit hard to figure out what you're going to do with this. Is this just like, I'm going to throw this into my +1/+1 counters, Ores of Sacrifice deck? I don't know. Maybe that's the way you should play this. This is certainly a very interesting build around. Like, again, we've been talking about just about every one of these cards is an interesting build around. But yeah, I'm not sure what to do with this. Maybe it just goes into the 99 of some +1/+1 counter decks, and you can get some value off either side. So we'll move on. This next one is the Is It Commander. So first side, the blue side, Uvala, Dean of Perfection, 2 and a blue, 2/2 taps. You may exile an instant or sorcery card from your hand with 3 hone counters on it, and it gains at the beginning of your upkeep this card. If this card is exiled, you remove a hone counter from it, and when the last hone counter is removed from the card, if it's exiled, you may cast it, and it costs 4 generic mana less to cast this way. So you really want, with this commander, a lot of spells that are fairly expensive at least, and have a lot of generic mana that you don't mind maybe waiting 4 turns for to get off of that quote-unquote suspend. I don't think this side's that powerful, but it is kind of interesting and an interesting build around, giving your instant and sorceries essentially suspend for 4 turns. But you really want to make sure those spells do something worthwhile after you've spent 4 more turns waiting to cast them, and you want to make sure that you can cast them, even though it does give you that reduction on their cost by 4. And, maybe it works well with X spells, I don't know, because, again, you just get that 4 mana, so, yeah, you can suspend an X spell, and you just, then, I've got 4 more mana to pay for this X spell. Like if I have Blue Sun Zenith, I guess I just Blue Sun Zenith for the 4, maybe I'll put more into it, I don't know, but by that time, that seems okay. So, again, you really wanted to do something big. The other side, the red side, is a 3 and double red 4/4. Efferet Shaman, Nursery, Dean of Expression. At the beginning of your upkeep, exile the top card of each opponent's library. Until end of turn, you may cast spells from among those exile cards. You may spend mana as though it were mana of any color to cast those spells. And whenever you cast a spell from exile, put a +1/+1 counter on Nafri. So, I think that this is a much better side, just in my opinion. It gives you free value. Essentially, you get to cast any number of cards, and you get to spend mana as though it were any color, which is really good as well. It has that ability, much like Italy, Primal Storm. I was trying to think of what it was there for a second. But yeah, it has that Italy ability. But then when you cast spells, it's getting bigger. So eventually it'll get much bigger. Plus it sort of works again with the other side if you've exiled spells with our counters on it. And that ability, when you cast those spells from the zone, if it's exiled this way, and it costs, so that ability of saying it costs 4 less, I just had to reread that to make sure, is part of the card. So it is exiled with that ability, so it will cost 4 less, no matter if the Dean of Perfection dies or whatnot. So if you get Nasari out, after that, and then you cast one of the spells from the quote-unquote suspend. I'm just going to keep calling it suspend because essentially that's what it is. It will get that +1 counter off you casting it from exile. At the beginning, it is at the beginning of the upkeep, so this has got to survive that turn rotation. That sometimes doesn't happen. Sometimes it does. Again, it's not always not going to happen. But sometimes it might not happen, especially if someone sees that you've got something, big or a really powerful spell in exile with some hour counters on it and whatnot. So they might want to not let you have, or several spells or whatever that are about to all come off all at once. Someone might not want to let you, get all those spells off and whatnot. The thing is, again, if you want to play that sort of style of deck, you really want to be able to, do that effect more and more. You want more effects that actually give you quote-unquote suspend and have abilities that actually give you stuff that exiles your stuff so that, again, you can cast it from exile. But, not that there's not a few of those, but there's not a lot of them. But these are mostly red effects. So, that certainly falls into, this deck's wheelhouse, and I still think that there is space for it. So I'm just wondering how good it is and what you can actually do with it. I'm not sure, there was a actual Izzet suspend commander, the old Jorah. Maybe this goes in Jorah, or maybe Jorah goes into this style of deck. I don't know, because then you're just like exiling a whole bunch of things with, suspend counters, and then eventually in a few turns you'll get them off suspend. So that does seem like it would work well with it as well. But again, you also want some effects, and you want not just effects that are one-offs, but you want effects that sort of can remove counters more quickly, so that you can cast those spells within a more reasonable time frame, rather than having to wait 4 or 5 turns or whatever it is to actually get them, and then, oh cool, someone actually just like, oh, I'll counterspell it as well, by the way, because I've had 4 turns of sitting there going, I know that's about to be cast, I'll save my counterspell for it, because it's going to be, coming down. But anyway, another interesting deck could be very easily built around this. Next up is the Golgari pair of commanders. The front side is the black side. It's a 1 black for a 1/1 with menace and lifelink. For Dean of the Vein. So if a non-token creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. When you do, you may pay 2. If you do, you create a 1/1 black and green pest creature token with when this creature dies, you gain 1 life. All these pests are coming pretty heavy in the Golgari colors. I think they really wanted to give Golgari this incidental life gain sort of stuff, and Golgari usually all about creatures dying and whatnot, so that sort of makes sense to get some benefit from them dying. Exiling your opponent's stuff, that seems pretty good. I think it's not quite Scavenging Ooze level, but then again, I don't know. You might find that going wide with multiple 1/1 tokens is better than going tall with +1/+1 counters. But it is 2 mana instead of 1 mana to exile them. But I guess you have to do it when they die as well. So you can't just like, oh, I'll save my mana for next turn or whatever. You have to do it when it would die. So that is another thing. So, you've got to keep your mana up with this. It does seem like more of a standard card or a modern card or whatever, because it's more about interactivity. It might fall into CDH territory, I'm not sure. I wouldn't know that meta or whatnot, but it does seem like a little bit more like you've got to have the answers and the mana to make sure you can almost always turn this on. The backside, the green side, Lacelle, Dean of the Root, 2 and 2 green for 4/4. Whenever you gain life, you may pay 1. If you do, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control. Those creatures gain trample until end of turn. So this seems like it also helps you when you're going wide. I actually think that this application's a little bit easier to manage and a little bit more powerful, especially for our format, and a bit of a better effect to somewhat build around, because life gain's pretty easy. Like you can play some of the creatures that when a creature ETBs under your control, you gain a life. So, you play a creature, you gain a life. Then you can put a +1/+1 counter on that creature, later on, or you can even put a +1/+1 counter on it right then and there. Maybe the trample's not that relevant until end of turn. Doesn't matter if you can't attack, but if you can attack with other things, that's good. So you can get in that ability pretty well. So they do work together somewhat. Again, like if you have both of them, if you can kill the pests pretty easily, kill them off, you're just going to be gaining that life quite a bit, and you can pay 1 and get counters on the rest of your pests, whatnot, so that your pests will get bigger and more dangerous. I don't know if there's any kind of infinite life sort of stuff that you could do with this, but I don't think there is, but then again, you could, I guess, because you just like put +1/+1 counters on all your stuff, and eventually that's infinite or almost whatever, at least +1/+1 counters. So surely that's lethal to someone, or at least a couple people, hopefully. But yeah, interesting strategy to build around here. Another Golgari card. Now we're into the uncommons, and some of the uncommons, yeah, sure, they're a little less powerful, but I still want to talk about them. Whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. Diana, Soul of Steeper, 2 mana, so just black and green, 1/3. Pay 1, sack another creature. Dana gets plus X plus O until end of turn, where X is the sacrifice creature's power. You know, a little bit of a sacrifice outlet. The 1 mana gate might, not be that great for some decks if you want to use this as a, sack outlet. I don't know whether this is strictly Voltron, I'm not sure, or whether you're just more interested in the gain 1 life aspect. We were just talking about the other commander that, when you gain life, you can put +1/+1 counters on all your creatures. So, and this one, just like whenever you gain life, each opponent loses 1 life. It's a good drain effect. So, if you have Sanguine Bond and those sorts of effects, this is another sort of veto stroke Sanguine Bond style effect that, you can infinite life your opponents out of the game with. So it seems interesting. I don't know exactly where it's going to go, but in those life gain life, making opponents lose life sort of shenanigans, seems quite good. It could also go into sort of an aristocrat sort of shell, because it does have that sacrifice ability, and a lot of the sacrifice payoffs do gain your life, so that will help with you draining people out more quickly and whatnot. Next is the Orzhov uncommon. Lifelink and Menace, 2 mana, 2/2, Killing Ink Duelist. Spells you cast that target a creature cost 2 less to cast. So I don't know whether you want to play removal tribal with this. I don't know. I don't think that that's a real thing. So it's kind of like a feather payoff to a degree, but in the wrong colors, of course, obviously. But, it's kind of like, what is it? Not prowess, but whatever it is, the one that when you target your own creatures, they gain that an ability. I can't remember what it's called. I know there's the enchanted one, but whatever, that's a different one. So I think you really want to run a similar deck to Feather. You want to run all these effects that pump or draw cards or whatever, and whatnot, that can affect your team, so that you can, especially ones that if you target one of your creatures, you target all of your creatures. You want to run those creatures so that all of your team gets the benefit. And just like having your spells that target your creatures be cheaper, pretty good. I think that's an interesting way to go in an Orzhov deck. Certainly, I wouldn't expect this sort of in those colours for the most part. Next up is the Boros commander, Quindilius, Field Historian. So 3 and red and a white, 2/4. Spirits you control get +1/+0. Whenever 1 or more cards leave your graveyard, create a 3/2 red and white spirit creature token. So I'm not sure what you can really do. I like it. I'm not talking about what a lot of these sometimes do, but what can you do with this? Like, you can certainly go down again the spirit route of having a few janky spirits in your deck. You can pair this with the other commander that cares about spirits that we were talking about earlier. But again, it's like, I think if you can find ways to have your creatures leaving the graveyard, or cards leaving the graveyard, making free spirits along the way, and just buffing them up is just a fairly decent effect for the most part. So I think this can see some play in those sort of spirit decks that we were talking about earlier, but it's weird that the effects that you would have to run with this, I think, and there has been some more support for that in this last set, so maybe they're there. Maybe I don't think that this is the most exciting one, but again, it's interesting to figure out and try to think what you could do with this. The fact that this buffs their power even more, it's a little weird because now you're just making 4/2s. So that's kind of a little weird. So, but then again, it's kind of like his reflection to a degree or something like that, even though it doesn't have any flavor to do with that or anything like that. But anyway, we'll move on to the Is It uncommon commander. So 3 mana, 1 and a blue and a red. Rutar Mercurial Arcanist, 1/4, 2 mana. Return her to the owner's hand. Copy target instant or sorcery spell you control. You may choose new targets for the copy. So it kind of has that ability to fork a spell, but you have to return it to your hand. So yeah, sure. Plus it kind of protects itself fairly well. So that's kind of interesting. I don't know, again, this seems like almost like an in response deck, and you want to cast like perhaps say a card draw spell. If somebody targets your commander, instead of countering with a spell, you're just like, okay, I'm going to cast this card draw spell. While that affects on the stack, I'm going to pay 2 and return my commander to my hand. And then I'm going to copy that card draw spell. So you get extra value out of your other things that you're casting. It seems very interesting. I'm not sure. I'm sure you've probably just got to find ways to make it infinite mana and then make infinite ETBs and make infinite spells and whatnot somehow with this. But I'm not sure how you do it. I'm sure there are ways though, but you certainly need to have it come back to your hand. You don't want to be having to cast this from your command zone with an extra step. So yeah, it seems quite interesting as well. Last but not least is the one of the colors that has one of the most things that they usually get is the Civic Colors. So Zimone, Quandrix Prodigy, green and blue, 1/2. Pay 1. You may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. 4 mana and tap. Draw a card. If you control 8 or more lands, draw 2 cards instead. So this is a sort of Tatiova style effect, kind of a little bit. But it's also an AC sort of ability, but it's also ability which we've seen on a few other creatures, which is, tap this thing, but you also have to pay 1 mana to put a land into play. So this can work well in landfall strategies. This works well in all of those big Simic mana decks and whatnot, where you're just trying to find extra value and whatnot. Just paying the 4 and tapping this to draw 2, which you'll probably do very often with this card, because eventually you're going to get to that, 8 or more lands, especially in a Simic deck that's all about ramping and whatnot. And this does help you ramp, and this is a constant source of, ramp from your hand as long as you do have lands in your hand again. So you might want to run a few effects that actually, tutor lands to your hand so that you can continue to play lands. But of course, you're going to draw lands when you do draw cards as well eventually. So you don't always need that ability that much, but you can always choose do things with things like natural selection, I think it is, which says, you can choose land or non-land and reveal cards from the top to hit one of the chosen type. So you always want to hit lands so that you can be like, okay, I'll put 2 lands to my hand, or a land to my hand. I untap, with this. Now I can, eventually get to my, 7 or whatever, or 8 or whatever. And then I'm just drawing 2 cards every turn. Now I don't care what I draw. All I want to draw is gas, so I'll choose non-land. So yeah, that seems quite powerful and quite good and quite interesting to build around, but it also seems like it just slots into all the other Simic sort of decks that we've gotten recently as well. But guys, that is it. We've finally got through them all for today. You see why I wanted to do these things separately, because it does take quite a lot of work to sort of put these things together and to go through them all. What cards do you like? What things do you want to build around? What did you find interesting in this video? Let me know down in the comments below. And are you hyped for the next video, the more videos in this series? Let me know that as well. Please remember that the success of channels like this is based on viewers like you, so please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing if you would like to support this content. You can also get social with us on our Discord and on our Facebook. If you would like to further support the channel, you can go onto our Patreon. All links are in the description. Thank you for your support. It really means a lot. I hope you have enjoyed this video here today. And if you have, I hope you will come back for another one. See you then.